Hello, everybody. Chris Jerome from the Radical Independent, and here we are, the Radical Roundtable, episode one. Short but enlightening discussion, hopefully over some major topics that have been in the news. Today, in our esteemed panel, we're joined by Kimber Fountain, libertarian philosopher, author of multiple history books, writer for the Independent Political Report, and a professional speaker. David Beckemeyer, tech veteran science communicator who hosts the Outrage Overload podcast, which uses social science and research to analyze the mechanics of toxic polarization in the outrage industry. Lura Forcum, a psychologist, writer, and strategist focused on political identity, institutional trust, and civic repair. And Kristin Jackson. She's co-founder and CEO of FreeSpoke, an independent news and search app that aggregates perspectives from across the political spectrum in one place, with no algorithm deciding what you see and no tracking of your data. And of course, I'm Christopher Jerome, a nobody with a Facebook page. Everybody, thanks for participating. I'll include some more info about you in writing when this gets posted, and it's awesome to have you. But before we jump in, I just want to show you guys a real quick something I posted today. It's a new meme I made. I'll see what you guys think on a scale of 1 to 5. No, not feeling it.
That's funny.
Rough crowd. I got to up my meme game here. I don't know. I don't follow a lot of the little viral things that have been going on, but I know this pointy thing's been going around, so I had to.
It's a good one.
I guess I better stick to my infographics about election reform.
I like it.
All right, so
I like it. Sorry, I'm jumping in there, but I liked it. It just, yeah, good.
Oh well, just try to have some.
You can't
fun.
make us try to read too many big words and keep it at that 5th grade reading level. We need tweet level.
Right.
Personally, I like to think for my jokes, so think for my laughs. So I think you're all right.
All right. Well, so the first main topic of the day, the U.S. semi-quincentennial. That's a good $10 word. America's 250th birthday, unfortunately, kind of dominated by the America 250 versus the Freedom 250 split, which kind of differ, in their origin and authority and political character. But we don't have to limit it to that. We can get into anything more historical, conceptual, whatever we want to dive into when it comes to. I feel like it's a pretty juicy topic. A lot of it's been going on in the news. So who wants to start us off? There's 9 directions we can go with this, but anybody want to kick it off?
I'll kick it off pretty benign, see where you guys take it. What is exciting to me about this moment is more from an entrepreneurial perspective. We get to look at these founding fathers who just broke out. Starting a business is extremely hard. Starting a company has to be way harder. And it was all about having an idea that you test. And you only get that idea to continue on if after you've tested it, you prove you still want it. That was really the philosophy behind it, which is what running a new business is all about. So I feel like as we come into this debate, it's like, what are we looking at? What are we celebrating? If somebody's throwing a big house party and they're doing something great and I don't like the guy throwing the party, yeah, I'm, probably not going to want to go to his party. But is there a foundation we are all celebrating? Would be my question.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like the Constitution gets a lot of the attention, and maybe rightly so. But it's kind of built sort of upon the deep underlying principles that are stated within the Declaration of Independence. So I feel like without that foundation, maybe the Constitution wouldn't have been as strong as it was. And kind of like what you say, comparing it to starting a business, unless you have sort of that foundation to build that structure, I don't know how successful. It's an interesting way to look at it.
On the backs of men who deeply disagreed and publicly disagreed. So maybe this disagreement today is something to celebrate.
I'm curious if other people felt like the celebration was kind of muted this year, because I was expecting a little bit more kind of like pomp than I really saw where I was. And I don't know if that's regional. It was also extraordinarily hot, so maybe just too hot for anybody to get excited. But I don't know. I was expecting a little more for 250 years.
I kind of feel the same way. I was too young. I was a baby for the bicentennial. I feel like I missed out. And I was kind of looking forward to this, and it just seemed a little muted, a little maybe because of the situation sort of the competing Freedom 250 versus the partisanship. It seemed like maybe it just wasn't as celebratory as it could have been.
I felt that on a more personal level because in the past, I've been disillusioned with government for a long time. So, in the past, I've always been able to separate the country from the government, right? Especially when it comes to celebrations like July 4th. But this year, I was really kind of touched by this kind of sorrow, and because as much as I wanted to think about the 250th as how far we've come, I couldn't help but think of it as how far we have strayed from those original principles and a lot of them. But to me, again, it's not about this particular celebration. It is less about the Constitution and the founding fathers. And what really gets me going when I think about this holiday is were the troops and the farmers and the common men who had no idea what they were doing. They had no military training. All they had was this desire and this innate sense of freedom, with which we are all born. And the fact that they were able to follow that and so many of them to the grave, that's what I believe really gets glossed over on July 4th. And I don't know why, but we have a tendency to focus on the Declaration and the founding documents and the big names, of the American Revolution. But to me, it's the humanity. It's the commonality with those just regular people who didn't have the big dreams or the big ideas, but they were still willing to put their lives on the line for it. And so that's where my sense of kind of disillusionment came from this year was like, we just lost the plot, man. So
that's an interesting take. I feel like that's almost every year in that sense.
I wonder though, because I'm in small town Missouri where I still am today. I live an hour and a half from here, but I have a farmer that farms my land with me, and the regular people who were setting off the fireworks and chanting "Let's go USA," and I mean, these are the regular guys who are looking at that early founding and saying, yeah, let's keep going. So
right. And there's a survey, I think it was from Cato or some think tank, and it said something like 70% of the people believe the nation's founding principles remain relevant. So that's a pretty high percentage. And that's encouraging, but like you said, maybe we don't really see it as much as we could or should. David, what do you think? You're contemplating here.
Well, I wrote a piece sort of on the topic of a lot of people were so there was a sort of a vibe out there that a lot of people were planning on kind of sitting it out or whatever. And I did sort of a corresponding episode that touched on a lot of the stuff we just talked about as well. And I don't know if I moved anybody, but the point of it was to try to say maybe don't sit it out. Like, there's other things you can get from this time period that don't have to be. And one of the tensions I talked about a little bit is kind of how do we define patriotism, right? For some people, it's cheering and waving the flag. For other people, it's kind of being, critical of the country, right? And I was kind of saying you don't have to pick one. Like both of those things are in the document you're celebrating right there, right? I mean, that's kind of what they were doing at the same time, right? I mean, like you said, they didn't get along and they were, contesting things and they wanted it to be better. So it's okay to either one of those ways to sort of think about patriotism is okay. You don't have to, one isn't better than the other. You don't have to pick one. So I kind of talk about that a little bit. And yeah, and some of the stuff that we're talking about, also some framing of history, right? I mean, I think somebody else mentioned just now that sort of the idea of there being conflict is kind of baked into our country too, right? I mean, there was conflict right from the start. There's been conflict, as we go along. You can just pick out various events in history. I'm sure some of you have better history than I do, but you could look at, the Civil War. You could look at period before the Civil War, and you can think about the Great Depression. You can think about some of these other situations along the way where it's never been, necessarily smooth sailing, and there's always been something for somebody to be worried about or trying to improve things. So, I think that it's okay to like be frustrated, want things differently in some way, and still sort of celebrate how we got here and where we can take it. Because the one thing that's key in all this is, it is a democracy, and we can decide like where we go from here, and so it's kind of up to us to do something. So that's kind of what I wrote about. Again, I don't know if I moved anybody, but that's kind of what I talked about.
No, I think that resonates with a lot of people. I feel like a lot of people tend to think of the founding, the revolution, the Declaration of Independence, and even the Constitution, that people just united in genius, and everyone's just loved this beautiful product. Almost nobody went away happy, and it was full of compromise. And I feel like our constitutional order is the tension is baked in. We're a democracy, of course it is, right? It's not the conflict and the tension. We have when it becomes so dysfunctional where it's not a problem solving enterprise anymore. Like, we can't get better without some sort of conflict and tension. Unfortunately, maybe the system is broken to the point where we're not correcting, and that's become more of a problem today.
I think there's something that builds off what you just said, what David was saying, is that debate was necessary. And I was at a gathering where they said, what happens if we don't have, what do we need in place today to ensure we have another 250 years? And for me, and it is my day-to-day job, but it feels like the ability to have a conversation is key, really, and then to get information in order to have a debate. There's a couple steps that you need to be able to do. And what I'm seeing, my hypothesis, curious what you guys think, is it's gerrymandering is one. So you're getting put in a bucket and then getting fed more and more on that way through gerrymandering. But the algorithm is doing the exact same thing. And there's something so enticing about that model, because in politics it's gerrymandering, in tech it's the algorithm. If I can just identify where you are and then keep you there and then keep feeding you more things to reinforce your point of view and keep you from seeing the other side, I get more money and more control. And those are the things that are hurting our ability to debate and maintain a democracy.
I also think that we have this attitude that's crept up recently that's sort of like, I'm only going to participate when it's exactly the way I think it should be. And I think that was David's point in writing the piece about the 250, right? Like, I'm going to sit it out unless it looks exactly how I think it should. And I think I see that a lot among voters too, who are just kind of saying like, I don't want to vote because it doesn't look exactly like I think it should. I'll participate when you guys get it up to my standards. And I think we need people who are really willing to put themselves into the institutions, into exchange with fellow citizens, into social connection, right? If we're going to create a government that represents our values. But like this idea that you can just sit on the sidelines and somebody else will improve it is
But there's
false.
an interesting challenge there in what you said, Laura, that you didn't see a lot of fanfare around this. I had friends sending me the live stream of what was happening on the National Mall, and the fanfare was beautiful, and the desire to make DC a place to gather, and the statutes, and there was a lot that went into it that mainstream media did not cover. So how do you ever get people to break through and see and go where they don't necessarily think it's perfect, but continue to encourage them? If they're not even seeing it, they don't even know it's existing.
Yeah, there's a rigidity and a certainty that really just stovepipes people into it's my way or the highway, this utopianism. The whole idea of compromise and giving up a little to gain a lot, and just basic democratic ideas are really struggling right now. But going back to what you said, Kristin, a little earlier, I live in the Phoenix area, and I kind of stopped going to the big fireworks shows because it's just a hassle, right? So much traffic so we started watching them from my house. But a couple of years ago, I was in a small town in Oregon on the 4th of July, and it was so different. It was, I don't know, it just seems so much more authentic. I don't know if it's like that in every smaller town, but it just seemed a lot different than just some production of, hey, we're going to throw up fireworks and 10,000 people are going to show up, and then we're always going to drive home.
We have massive flags hanging from tractors. Oh, yeah. We have tons of 250. Like, it's a lot, and in a beautiful way.
I agree, but I also think that sometimes we get wrapped up in the symbolism of things and deny the actual heart and and meaning behind things, because it's really easy to hang a flag. Anybody can hang a flag, but it's a lot more difficult to, like David said earlier, have that discourse between the different sides and establish that and really know what that means, because that's one thing that gets to me. And David again mentioned the patriotism thing and the warped, you can't even really call yourself a patriot anymore unless you want to be, lumped in with the alt-right, because they've kind of commandeered that word. And so, I think as much as I agree, there can be different ambiances and different, interpretations, and it all comes down to the individual. But sometimes the real meaning, kind of gets lost, because we'll hang a flag and we'll say a prayer and then we'll condemn the next person who doesn't think like us. And so there has to be that balance. We have to realize, like David said, that patriotism is embracing the all of what the United States is, and not just this very specific, small-minded viewpoint of what being a patriot is and what being an American is as well.
Yeah, just connecting it to important principles and values. Civic education in this country maybe is
Sure.
not as good as it could be. And we've kind of taken the simplistic road, patriotism.
For that episode that I did, I originally planned on just having a bunch of sort of good vibe little clips, and I would put that out as an episode, and that would be the episode, right? But I just sort of randomly got this opportunity to talk to a Gen Z political science student who wanted to remain anonymous, which is fine, and so cynical, right? I mean, super cynical, just about so many things. And it was a great contrast for the episode, because I sort of used that as the pivot in the middle of the episode. Just remember that that's, for this person, like, that's their life. Like, they've only sort of lived in this modern, very toxic kind of environment, right? That's how they think politics says, it works. That's just how politics works. And so, they're very like down on democracy can't do anything. It's just the oligarchs will control whatever they control. We can't, doesn't matter what we do, very cynical.
Right.
And I thought it was really great to have that viewpoint, because we can't just pretend that's not a serious thing. Like, that's real. And we have to kind of acknowledge that and think about it. We can't just sort of write that off, because I don't think that person is alone. I think they represent a segment of the population. I don't know exactly how big, but I think they do represent a segment of the population that, again, we have to kind of acknowledge that exists.
An opportunity for a future politician to speak to them and give them a voice. Seems like
right, exactly.
Future.
Yep.
Yeah, there's kind of a disconnect where we talk about the patriotism, maybe even talk about some of the principles, talk about the Declaration of Independence and our 4th of July, and we celebrate. But then there's this whole generation of kids. And David, I'm right there with you. I mean, I'm a high school teacher. I deal with 18-year-olds 5 days a week, and you're exactly right. There's a lot of, and who can blame them these past 10, 20 years?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of apathy, discontent, anxiety. It's not the U.S. that I grew up in, and that's troubling for sure. Well, I was going to say there was a PBS story. I don't know if you guys saw it. It was a poll, talking about disconnects. What was it? 46%, something like close to half, didn't know that the America 250 commemorates the adoption of the Declaration of Independence. Nearly half the people polled didn't connect what that was actually about. Well, that's a little disturbing.
Well, that was one of the points I was going to make, was I think part of that disconnect and that disillusionment is a lack of education, right? Plain and simple. Like, it's a lack of knowledge of what these men actually did and what our country actually represents, and that we've done something that's never been done before. And really, I think it all comes down, right, as far as our younger generations, down to education. And
it seems like this is almost a microcosm of the larger issue. What's been the focus in the media? What's been in the big stories? It's been this Freedom 250 versus the American 250. And so what do we look at? Oh, the Ferris wheel had a bad generator. Oh, the Trump arch, the smaller fake one at this fair, was falling apart. We get distracted by all these nonsensical partisan things. There's a Confederate flag in the North Carolina booth or something. That's
not
what
the
gets
beautiful
the
Marine
attention.
band and the
Right.
flyover and the there's so much good that when the media doesn't cover it, you don't see it.
Right.
Nobody's gonna fly to DC to see it themselves. You need it to be covered.
I don't know. It's a paradox, because you got to recognize some of what's going on. Wow, there's some issues here, but at the same time, you can't be consumed by it, and that's the only reality that exists.
Or ignorant to reality. Like, we need We need information to provide reality. And then it can say, and I don't like it. Like, here's all the things happening. I want you to know about it. And I think it's stupid and a waste of taxpayer dollars, right? But at least you like provided a reality. So everybody gets to live in the same understanding of what's actually happening.
But I think that brings us back to the reality that people are living, right? Which is the price of things and the price of gas and the price of groceries and the constant conflict that's going on. And so we can rail against the 250 celebration being mired in partisanship, but it was partisanship that caused the 250 celebrations to fracture like it did into two pieces, right? And so and that's the thing. I think people are in touch with reality. They're in touch with their individual personal realities. And this year, just quite frankly, a nice big celebration wasn't enough to make people forget about that, obviously. So
But the reality I'm referring to is Axios saying you can sit down on a plane and you're going to sit next to somebody who likely is getting all their information from a source that you don't read and follows and respects leaders, thought leaders you have never heard of. And so there's a really good chance the two of you, are living in different realities. So that's the reality I'm referring to.
No,
Gas
I get
prices
that.
are always a part of the
Yeah.
discussion and a political.
I was not, I was definitely not refuting your point at all. I was
of
simply
reality,
saying that we can, of course the mainstream media is a joke, but we can rail against them not getting the reality of the 250 celebration, which is probably true. But the fact of the matter is that they do have a reality through which they are interpreting things, and it's their own personal reality. And when you're disillusioned with everything around you, it kind of, puts a damper on a big celebration like that, regardless of what's being shown on the news, So that's, again, wasn't refuting at all, just kind of, adding that extra layer, that paradox, like Chris mentioned. So
I think too that there's a real issue with, people have this sense that they understand reality through their media channels, right? And they don't like what they see. And rather than that, inspiring them to sort of turn closer, I think to your point, Kimber, to their local reality and the people, the community, and the political life that's around them, they just sort of disengage entirely. And so I would much rather have people invest in knowing the government that's around them, state and local government, knowing the people around them and influencing those things. But what I worry is happening is people are just sort of saying, I understand the student you talked to, David, but they feel like they can't influence anything, so they check out. It has its own logic, but it's not workable for self-government and democracy.
That's really a great point. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I totally agree with the idea of, better information and also the civic education piece. But I will say this particular individual was pretty well informed, which might be an exception, and they did cherry pick kind of bad things, right? And not necessarily bad thing, but they didn't really seem super partisan in it. They just had kind of their own worldview. They were in a cherry picking of sort of the bad things about America. I would say, and they were not particularly open to saying maybe it's not as bad as you're thinking, but that's okay. But they were pretty well informed. I mean, they really did kind of know how things worked and some of the history and some of the other things. And so it was an interesting. I was quite enlightened by this conversation. A little bit depressed because it's like this is kind of sad for this person. But I get it. Like you were saying, Laura, I totally get it. Like I understand why they feel that way.
It's a little scary. I mean, that's incredible destabilizing to have if we're going to paint with a broad brush, to have a generation coming up with that sort of mindset, a little bit scary.
I know there's not enough money that could pay me to be a congresswoman today. Anyways, that's my opinion. But if there's a whole generation of people who are feeling that way and we're not getting the best and the brightest in to shape that space, it's going to hurt us.
Well, and I'd like to bring it back to one thing that Laura mentioned quickly is about the local aspect, because one thing that I often talk about is, there's a reason that the founders, created a republic, because it's easier to move states than it is to move countries. And it's easier to move cities than it is to move states. And so this graduation of the size of government within a republic actually increases the influence of the individual. right? So like back to what Laura said, this disillusionment with what's going on at the federal level, it's trickling down and it's impacting that influence at the local level, which is really where we were intended to be the most powerful. And so, if we're losing that, reality, that direct community around us, I mean, that's a huge break to me in the very foundational elements of the republic also. So I don't know how we change that. I don't know, what we do generationally to make these kids see that they don't have, their worlds need to get a little bit smaller, maybe, and let's just reach out next door, next street, next town, and start making change there. Because the thing is, if every major revolutionary movement in American history didn't start with people going into places and beating them over the head with this is the right thing to do and this is the right way to think. It started with individuals. It started with people changing their minds and starting to look at things differently. And so we need to bring back, I believe, that the emphasis on that individual interpretation of our worlds and the power that we have right now in our own lives and in our community to make change, because all of that is collective and it all builds. You build strong communities, you build strong states, you build a strong nation, but it all starts so much simpler than that.
I was just going to say that's a great point. Something that I talk about on occasion on the page, but how politics has been nationalized to the point where everybody now thinks the same thing. And before, like just as an example, in my community, where maybe Republicans were supported local schools because it was local. That's where their kids went. But now the mentality is, oh, the schools in San Francisco are woke garbage, so I'm against public schools altogether. And it's almost like that with everything. Politics has been nationalized to the point where that local and that community has just been rubbed out.
I have to bring up my favorite Nassim Taleb quote that I think I've emailed Chris and said to David, but he says, at the federal level, I'm a libertarian, at the state level, Republican, at the local level, a Democrat, and at the family community level, a socialist. And I'm wondering, Chris, if that would be an attractive way to look at things as a student, because that socialist Democrat, democracy, like let's get in, let's support people, let's build people up, let's help everybody get the American dream, works extremely well at the local level.
Yes.
So if we could get people excited about that and then active in that space, maybe there's a path.
Right.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree with that, because that's one thing that, libertarians are often railed against, because we're called selfish because we're individualists or whatever. But what people don't realize is that there's a reason that phrases like the weakest link exist, right? What is the weakest link? The weakest link is an individual. It's one person within a group. Groups are made up of individuals. I'd really like to be, an advocate for advancing the notion that libertarianism isn't about selfish individualism. It's about when we build up the individual, we automatically make the community stronger, because if you you can only take care of other people if you can take care of yourself.
And then you don't need powers far away who don't really know you making decisions about your life.
Exactly. Imagine that.
All right. Well, yeah, I didn't really want to just beat a dead horse with the conflicting 250s and kind of go down that rabbit hole. So it was nice to be able to just talk about some of the other aspects and the history and just the bigger picture, basically. I think we're going to skip the Supreme Court, maybe the next episode, who knows, right? Supreme Court came down with a lot of decisions, right? Invariably, about half the people are going to love it and half the people are going to hate it. And that kind of gets into the whole imperial presidency. But we only have
That's probably worth an entire episode.
Yeah, it kind of does.
I feel like it's a healthy place where like both sides get angry all the time. I'm like, I think that's success. I think that is actually what we're supposed to be having.
Yeah, that's kind of the shorthand,
that's
right?
Basically the whole point. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
If both sides are unhappy, then maybe something's going right, or something
how about
along
both
those lines.
sides? Both sides are concerned about the excesses of government power. I think that's like the best place we could be, is for people to be a lot more suspect about how power is wielded by the federal government, which is exactly what our founders were concerned about and what brought them here. So I'd like to see a lot more of that. Unfortunately, I think what I tend to see is people who are fine as long as the power is held by their side.
Exactly. And that's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah. Executive overreach is fine as long as it's their president doing it. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're getting close to the end. So, I did want to talk about soccer. I know it's probably maybe not everybody's favorite thing, but dang it, there's a soccer game coming up here in about, I don't know, 25 minutes. So the U.S. team's going to be playing Belgium. What do you guys think about the World Cup in terms of the press, at least on social media? Thoughts on the games in terms of a lot of news out there basically talking about, the foreigners coming to the United States, watching the games, having a great time, loving the United States. Have you guys picked up on any of that?
Mhm.
I have, yeah. I'm actually not a soccer slash football fan, but I am a huge baseball fan. And I was watching the Cubs play at Citi Field, playing the Mets a couple of weeks ago, and there was a group of Norwegian football fans in the stands, and they just lit the whole place up. They were doing, I think it was called like the Viking crawl or something like that. Like the
Yeah.
videos are pretty viral on social media, but it really struck me. Not only was I completely enraptured by their joy, but it was just like, because I'm a huge football fan as well, but we've gotten to the place in American sports where even doing the wave is like considered totally passe now. Like people are like, sit down, and I'm usually one of them. And so it was just such this beautiful contrast between like just this eruption of joy, for no reason, just for sports, just because we could. And it was kind of a little bit telling about kind of how jaded I think Americans could have gotten. Like we can't even let loose at a sporting event really anymore. The last Chicago Bears game I went to, like I was going to my seat and I was all in a great mood and I was trying to joke around the people around me and they were just like, it's just weird. So
Yeah.
anyway, thank you Europeans for giving us some
Pure
happiness
joy.
Right.
yes, in our sports arenas. So
A couple
yeah.
weeks ago, I was in Boston, and it was right before the soccer games there, and this bunch of people from Scotland were coming over, and they were in our hotel, and they're walking around the downtown area, and they're hilarious, and they were having such a good time. But the question is, will it boost tourism in the long run, and does this do anything for the American image?
I live in Kansas City, Missouri now, after having lived in Washington, D.C. for 19 years, or, on the East Coast generally. And it's so fun to see so many people speaking different languages in my neighborhood in downtown Kansas City, but also my East Coast, West Coast friends who happen to be Argentinian by birth and came to Kansas City, Missouri for the first time ever and were shocked how amazing it was. So I know just from following, the radio NPR in Kansas City, there's not a lot of sales going on. People buy a couple of souvenirs, only there for the night and leave. But they're getting barbecue, they're
Yeah.
experiencing, this beautiful, welcoming city. It has to do something positive. Curious.
I think at the very least, it separates the American people from our government, right? So at least maybe people overseas can see, like, they won't judge us by what's going on at the federal level or by our political, fracturing. So at least I think maybe it gives them some perspective that there is a difference.
And I think it's also an opportunity for people to see themselves through somebody else's eyes. So as Europeans have kind of, or people from all over the world have been traveling to the US and kind of being delighted, being surprised by what they've encountered. I think my hope is that it's kind of raised people's sense of national pride or civic pride, that like there are wonderful things about this country. And yes, they're struggling in many regards, but we also have unprecedented freedoms and financial success and possibility in front of us. And the fact that it's so easy for us to forget those things, I think is kind of an indication of just how commonplace they've become. Maybe this is actually helpful for people to see, like, not everybody has what Americans take for granted, and we can have a healthy civic pride instead of just jingoistic or, 250 rah-rah pride.
That was great. I totally agree. That's definitely what it has done for me. The little snippets that I've seen for sure.
Yeah.
And probably the biggest takeaway, they love ranch.
Exactly.
Having to dump it at the airport realizing they can't take it on the plane. They're
Aw.
unhappy.
Well, there were actually airports that were selling travel size bottles in the little gift shops as well. So, but what they really need to learn is that if you really want the full ranch dressing experience, you have to buy the powdered seasoning and make it yourself with the mayonnaise and the milk, because the bottled ranch doesn't compare.
You should
So,
market that and take a little off the top.
There you go.
Send
Right.
everybody their powdered version.
exactly right. There you go. Good idea.
There's a group called More in Common that recently did a study, and they found that passionate sports fans are often the most civically engaged. And I thought that was interesting because you
Wow.
think of the stereotype of the dumb sports fan,
Jock, yeah.
but kind of going back to what Kimber was saying, why can't we check out at the game, have fun, have a blast, and just kind of remove politics from certain areas of our lives, but you could still be engaged. I that was an interesting thing. And I think they said that they also the fans show more interest in cross-partisan conversation,
Wow.
which is fascinating.
That is
That-
fascinating. And well, not only do I feel that personally, but one thing about sports that attracts me to it, because I'm kind of an individual athlete. I never played team sports, but one of the things that, and this might be digressing a little bit too far, but I love the intelligence of it, the athletic intelligence of it, and I also truly believe that when an athlete is at the pinnacle of their performance, that there's a spiritual dimension to that too, that they are really lined up with like the fullest essence of who they are. So to me, it's a very academic, but also a very inspirational thing to watch as well. So maybe there's more. I thought I was, one of the only people who felt like that, but it seems like there's probably a lot more, because it kind of tracks with that theory that you just mentioned.
That deep dedication it takes to be an expert at that
Yes.
level of your field, that
Mhm.
intellectual piece is there too. Yeah.
Exactly. It's the mental fortitude as well as the physical
Mhm.
also. Yeah, for
And
sure.
then there's the idea of sportsmanship, right? Which I think is what we're missing in our civic life right now. So if you really care about the game and the ability to continue playing the game, then you treat, you are a good loser, you're a good winner. There's this ethic of sportsmanship that says our ability to keep playing the game is more important to me than a single win or loss. And I don't know if we've become a nation of bad sports, but it's so interesting to hear that like people who are so engaged in sports are so civic minded, because I think like they're modeling for us all these things that we've forgotten in our polarization. It's okay to be in opposition to each other. It's okay to disagree. We have institutions to help us sort out our disagreements so we can keep playing. And in this case, the playing is, governing ourselves together.
And I love
and
hearing the
that's-
athletes saying that I know kids are watching. And so while I was angry about this, I wanted to be a good model, which I think is another parallel we're starting to miss in politics.
I think something else sports, I won't even say models, I think it just puts it in concrete terms, is pluralism in reality, right? I think for a lot of the World Cup certainly demonstrates that, but all sports are now that way, right? I mean, if you're going to participate, or even as a fan, some of these sports, I mean, you're witnessing a very pluralistic version of society, right? I mean, it's all kinds of people that get involved in sports, and if you play sports, you find the same thing, and it's another. To me, it's almost like what happens if you do civic participation, right? You go on a sports team and you're dealing with people from all over the country, from all over the world, and all these different worldviews, and now you got to play together, you got to get along with each other, and so you learn something there. And so I think that's another big piece of what sports can do is sort of put a real concrete sort of perspective on that we are a pluralistic society here, and we have different languages, flags, all kinds of different stories and cultures, and
Chants and cheers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, and talking, it's interesting. I mean, we can get in a whole metaphor about how sports is like our politics, I think.
I had never thought of it before, but I'm going to carry this one with me.
Well, there's a lot of research that shows fans in general, they do believe in fair play. So they want to win, but they actually want it based on merit. And there's been polls and surveys and stuff where the fans, if they win, but it's by some cheating method or something like that, they actually don't like that and they don't want that. So that's kind of a little dichotomy there between sports and politics, where I feel like anything goes. We're going to sell our soul to get what we want. Where in sports, it's still a little more pure, I think. Okay, last comment here on the soccer. U.S. versus Belgium. We got I think it's starting in about 12 minutes. What's the score? Go.
Oh, you want us to predict the final score?
Final score.
USA won
I'm going to
nothing.
say 3-1 U.S.
Wow.
3-1
I say
US.
1-0 US.
Okay.
Right.
Can I say 1-1? The U.S. wins in kicks.
Ooh,
What's that called?
that could be interesting. That'll be a nail biter for sure if that happens.
I'll go on the high end. I'll say 4-2 US.
Yeah, we want a
It's
high
gonna be an
scoring game.
exciting
We want
game.
action. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think we're going to try to land this plane. The first Radical Roundtable. Can we stick the landing? So thank you so much, everybody. David, Laura, Kinder, Kristin, for an excellent brief conversation. Any last minute shout outs before?
Yes, if you are independently minded, please check out the Independent Political Report. We cover all of the third parties in the nation, Green, Libertarian, but as well as hundreds of others. So it's definitely a place to find like-minded people and get news from an unbiased and non-duopoly source as well.
I'm going to take that lead. Check out freespoke.com. You can download the app. You will always know the full story. Nobody can stick you in one reality or the other. You're going to see both sides with a consensus where there's overlap. So you have grounding, and then you can see where the sources are coming from. You can see a timeline on how things develop. You can see podcasts tuned to the moment in the podcast, maybe this one, where they're talking about what you want to hear. So check out freespoke.com.
And I write a newsletter about civic life and our shared lives governing together. It's called How to Human. It's on Substack and LinkedIn, so you can find it there. And I also have a podcast with a political scientist called We Made This Political. So we talk about making politics more relational and less power focused. So check that out if it sounds like something, it's a little bit of a different perspective.
Awesome. And I have a podcast called Outrage Overload, and I also have a Substack by the same name. You can find all that at outrageoverload.net.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks for playing along, everybody, and we'll see you next time around. That's
Thanks,
a
Chris.
wrap.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Good to see you all.
Thanks, guys.
Bye,
Nice to
guys.
meet you.
Go USA.
Yeah.
Okay.